And of course, one of the sectors that Elin mentioned that is particularly growing is tourism. And with tourism also comes a lot of issues to deal with. And Ágúst Bogason at Nordregio is dealing exactly with that. The toll of tourism, how do we deal with that? Ágúst, please give me a warm hand.
Hey. So yeah, tourism. That's what I'm gonna talk shortly about. Having trouble opening this, so. And it, in many ways, rhymes with what Elin was talking about earlier, because we're focusing on remote and rural tourism in this research project I'm talking about. And often it's presented as kind of the way of the future tourism for the rural regions, with many industries now gone or in decline, or with automation of different industries, people often look to tourism, and maybe you hear more from the more urban areas that tourism is something that's going to help the more remote regions. And in many ways, that's of course true. And there are many benefits. And we've heard a lot today about environmental sustainability and economic sustainability, but this is more social sustainability. So this is just very briefly like the key goals of the project that we did. We were trying to understand the social cultural impacts of tourism while focusing on the regional tourism mainly. And also try to identify some indicators for measuring social sustainability in tourism. So we did a literary review, looked at policies as well, national tourism policies, and did some case studies, which we are now finalizing with different stakeholder interviews and so on to gather more data. And naturally, people might ask first and foremost, what is socially sustainable tourism? And also, and that's of course the first question we asked ourselves: what is it, and is it really necessary to look any further into this? Because we have a lot of positives with tourism, and everybody likes to travel, and so on and so on. We might not think so much about it, but we have a lot of research on the economic benefits of tourism, as well as in recent years more and more research on the environmental effects. So we thought, yes, we need to take a closer look at this. So we started out by having a look what is the social in sustainable tourism. So we have to think about more than the economic and environmental. We have to take social sustainability into account to cover all the three dimensions of the sustainability concept. So then we come to the iceberg. We know that there's about 10% of the iceberg usually visible. Well, there's a lot we can't see of the iceberg that's beneath the surface, what's hidden. And the visible is often what is highlighted, and I mentioned earlier. It's the job diversification, the rural development effects, possibilities for better services related to tourism. We have often improved infrastructure and so on, but we also have a very visible negative effect, which is environmental degradation, if tourism becomes too great. But then beneath the surface, we have a lot of things. These are things we can't easily see or touch or measure, and these are often social things, not necessarily all negative, but some of them can be. For example, the general cultural impact of tourism, disruption to daily life, strain on local resources. Too much tourism can cause inflation, rising cost of living, housing prices, and so on and so on. And many have heard of protests from larger cities, and although we are not maybe at that tolerance level or lack of tolerance in the Nordics yet, as places like Barcelona or Venice, we still see some signs that there is growing intolerance of tourism during busy seasons. So first of all, we looked at what does literature on tourism tell us about socially sustainable tourism. And it involves a few things: community engagement and empowerment, cultural integrity and heritage preservation, equity and accessibility, over-tourism and community displacement, public services and infrastructure, and a lot more, but these are a few of the key things. And then we looked more into the policies, national policies, tourism policies of the Nordic countries. So what is the reality in the Nordic countries? And it seems like the literature and policy in the Nordic countries are pretty much in agreement. They're speaking the same language, discussing the same things. This tells us that we are aware, we know about the dangers, the challenges. However, we only mention them quite often. We're not necessarily addressing them in our policies or operationalizing how we can deal with them. And our recent field studies in all of the 8 Nordic countries confirm there are certain social tensions in the Nordic countries when it comes to especially over-tourism, and often these are small communities with certain traditions and so on. So it's harder to bear large number of tourists. One small example is for example, the 10 tourism commandments in Greenland, or tourism culture commandments. These are quite easy to use rules, common sense, some might say. They're laid out in very simple terms. For example, things like talk to people, not about them, and don't take pictures of people without asking them. And this particular picture is from outside a kindergarten in Luleå in Greenland, asking people not to take photos of the children while they're playing there, because this is their daily life. And in Greenland, this is a very common sight during tourism high season. Tourists come from cruise ships into a small town of maybe a few hundred, maybe a few thousand people living there on a regular basis. They all wear the same kind of jackets, and locals refer to them as red jackets or yellow jackets or whatever they have on. They come in for the day, walk around, and interact often with and meet the locals. For example, here 2 kindergarten teachers walking around with their children. And me and my colleague, for example, watch this, and saw one of the ladies from the tourism group walk over the street and take a photo without asking and then continuing. So it's just a small example of how we maybe are not considering the effects we're having on the daily life of people in the places we visit. And I also know that I took a photo of all of this and I'm now showing it to you, and that might be a little bit weird, but now I'm telling you and hoping that at least 2 of you won't do the same thing, so I balanced it out and a little bit better than that. Where are we here? Yeah, social sustainable tourism in the Nordics. How we understand it. The Nordic understanding, according to policy and the interviews we've conducted. It's really about that tourism has to benefit the local communities. We also have to take into account and preserve cultural heritage and secure equitable distribution of resources. We have to engage the community when planning for tourism and consider the well-being of residents. And this is well done in the policy of the Nordic countries, but not operationalized in a very good way. So if we look at social sustainability, it's not a simple concept as such. It includes all sorts of different things that must be taken into account. And if we then talk about socially sustainable tourism, we must also add other dimensions, that is the economic dimension and environmental sustainability. And this, of course, is not a simple task, especially if we are to balance this and hit that sweet spot there in the middle. But when we're discussing sustainable tourism, we have to take all of the three dimensions into account. So from our work so far, presented in a report released or published last summer, and we'll then have another report published early next year, very early next year, and present that with more material from the case studies. But we see that we need stakeholder collaboration, and we in the Nordic countries, according to our work, are actually doing this quite well. When planning for tourism, we engage with the stakeholders and they participate, and then there we are well off. We also engage the communities. We're doing quite okay, but could do this a little bit better. Then where we're lacking, and when we're talking about that we have to operationalize better, it's more about specific indicators to measure the social sustainability or how the well-being is. Community well-being, cultural preservation and so on. These things are things that are hard to measure, but it's something that we might need to do on a more regular basis over a longer period of time to get some sort of measurement of how we're doing. Also then monitor and evaluate, and by that we can ensure adaptive policy improvements based on the social measurements that we then can do. Again, and reflecting on what we've heard earlier today, our priorities might be a bit strange. Early this morning we heard interesting things, and if we think back to the basics of our existence really, we can see that we rely on nature. It's the foundation of the existence of life, and to pave the way for to have a society, we have to have nature and resources that are in good shape. And this then allows us to have advanced things like economy, which operates within our society. And in the Nordics, we pride ourselves off our societies, probably some of the most fair and best societies in the world. And we must also remember, when it comes to tourism, that nature is the attraction. That is the commodity or the thing that we are presenting and selling. And in more than 90% of the time, especially in remote and rural tourism, the thing people come to experience. They want to experience the wilderness, the solitude, the untouched nature. But our priorities when it comes to tourism development might be a bit askew. We focus on the growth, on the economy, which is of course very important. But we must also measure and have a look, especially when tourism has grown as fast as it has in certain regions in the Nordic in the past decade or a little longer. We must focus on the social well-being of people. So balance these different dimensions of sustainability. Balance is the key. So the main message maybe is, at the end, we need to value our well-being and how we are performing, and our success. In this case, in the case of tourism, we need to value it with more than simply economic terms. There's no foundation for economic activities when it comes to tourism if we don't have a solid society and a robust and reliable nature and resources. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ágúst. And of course, your report can be found at the Nordregio site if we just remember your name and search for that.
Should be easy to find.
And you're also going to be easy to find because you're taller than most of us, so we'll find you at the lunch break to have follow-up questions because tourism is so relevant to so many of us. And we're all either part of it as tourists or as somebody that the tourists might want to take the pictures of that we say, please don't. Thank you so much for that. Let's move on to the... Again, one hand again.